One of the most confusing things when I first started studying philosophy was, where do I start and who do I read first? This is the topic of today's video. Hello everyone, I hope you're doing alright. Today I want to talk about where do we start when we want to learn philosophy. When I started, I didn't even know many names in the philosophy section. I mean, I knew there was this guy, Aristotle, and then there's Nietzsche, something like that. And then I knew about Socrates and this guy named Plato, who was his teacher, or was that the other way around? And I was even more lost when it came to book titles. I think I only knew that there was a book named The Republic. It can be quite confusing, given that when talking about philosophy, people reference philosophers from any historical period since ancient Greece, and there have been a lot of different philosophers since then. So, how to get started? Well, I'm gonna tell you, based on my knowledge, how I would get started if I had this knowledge back then. Now, I will talk about books, but I will also talk about other ways which you can get started in a quicker, simpler, less energy and time consuming way. I think for a lot, starting little by little can be a good way to start, given that when first approaching a philosophy book, it can be quite challenging for some of us. I can tell you one way I do not suggest on you getting started is just opening Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, for example, without any previous background. Trust me, a friend of mine tried, and it didn't work out well. Okay, so a great way for getting started is actually right here on YouTube. There are two channels which I think do a great job synthesizing ideas and philosophers. Now, one of them is in English, the other one is in Spanish, and I do this because I would also like to give you the advice that if you speak different languages in a good level, I think you should take advantage of that. The more languages you speak, the more tools that you'll have access to. To me, being able to speak two languages has been a great tool for studying philosophy. Number one, the School of Life. They are usually short videos, but very well explained and with great production. I've used it to check out their series on Western philosophy, and I do think this is one of the best ways to get started. I've also watched the series on Eastern philosophy and really enjoyed it. Number two, Adictos a la Filosofía. They are usually longer videos of about 15 to 25 minutes. I also really like the way he explains and interprets philosophers. I think he doesn't oversimplify them, but at the same time explains them in a clear way. He has great content and a lot of detailed content. A bonus here is CosmicSkeptic. This is a channel I've only recently followed, but have found great content. I haven't seen much on him explaining what different philosophers have said. I don't think he does that, but what he does is just as awesome. If you've wondered, why is philosophy important? Is there room for philosophy in our time? I think he is a great example of how philosophy and philosophical thoughts not only fit in our world, but are essential to analyze and propose solutions to our current problems. Now, I personally agree a lot on what he says. Some of you may not, but I think you will get a lot out of the discussions that he has on his channel. Next up, we have one of my favorites, which is a podcast. It's called The History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps, and you can listen to it on Spotify, on iTunes, or on their website. Professor Peter Adamson is very clear and engaging in the way in which he narrates the podcast. Again, I don't think he oversimplifies philosophers at all. Each episode is 20 minutes long, which I think is great time. The podcast is extensive because it really does commit to not having any gaps. When I started, usually people would not talk a lot about the Hellenistic schools of philosophy. He does. And there you'll find schools like the Stoics, which I think have now become part of mainstream culture, so a lot of people are interested in hearing about them. Now, let's go with the books. As I've said, for me, chronology is essential, at least when getting started. Philosophers almost always reference previous philosophers or philosophical problems. Philosophical ideas evolve in a historical way most of the time. So if you're going to watch the videos on the YouTube channels or the podcast, be sure to watch it in a chronological order. I think one thing that truly helps when reading philosophy is having an idea of the different historical periods and what happened on them, to have a picture in your head of what goes before and after. These are the main reasons for my first book recommendation. This is not yet a philosophical book or a philosophy book in a strict sense, but it is a novel on the history of philosophy. It's called Sophie's World by Justine Carter or something like that. The first reason why I recommend this book is because it's a simple and very enjoyable read. At the same time, it was extremely useful to me when getting started because it solved a lot of the questions that I mentioned I had on the beginning of the video. It provided me with a picture of the evolution of philosophy from its earliest stages to our time. When was the Renaissance? When the Enlightenment? What about the Middle Ages? All of these questions are important, and even more important are what ideas gave rise to these historical periods? Which philosophers? How do all of these ideas and philosophers relate to each other? I can tell you this was extremely useful to me when I started getting into more complex readings. If you have never read anything related to philosophy, then I think it is a great way to start. You will also get a chance to see which periods or philosophers interest you more. Now, we've established the importance of chronology, so now let's move on to some other books on philosophy. This is by no means an exhaustive list. It's just somewhere to start, based on what I've found to be the most relevant texts. So, ancient Greece. We start with the pre-Socratics. I don't think you necessarily have to read a full book on them unless you're interested, but I do think it is important for you to know what distinguishes them from other thinkers, which were not called philosophers before them. Next, we have Plato, which is essential. So you can start by reading the Apology of Socrates, and then other relevant texts are the Symposium, the Phaedo, the Phaedrus, and the Republic. Next, we have Aristotle, which you can read Nicomachean Ethics or Poetics and Politics, and be sure to understand some of his metaphysics if you are into that area of philosophy. It's really important, I think, to understand what these Greek thinkers said to then read something further. Later on, understanding some Christian thinkers might also be a good idea. Now, from here, if you would like to proceed still in a chronological order, period by period, that is my best advice. So if you would like to see a more in-depth video on how to proceed on that manner, then please leave a comment. Otherwise, you might be really interested on reading Nietzsche or Sartre, but you don't have the will or time to read all of the previous thinkers before. Then what you might do is do some research on which are the most influential philosophers relative to who you really want to read, and just be sure to understand their basic idea. And as I've mentioned already, it is essential that we not only read the books, but understand them, analyze them, and question our thoughts on them. If you haven't watched my video on how I approach philosophical texts, then I'll leave a link in the description. I hope this is useful to all of you who really want to get started but might not know where or how to do it. If you did find it useful, then please leave a like and share this video to help other people get started in their philosophical journey. I can tell you, it is a beautiful and extremely rewarding journey. If you have further questions on this, or you would just like to talk about it, you can look me up on Instagram and write me a DM. I'll leave the link in the description. I'll be able to help you as much as I can, or just have a nice chat about philosophy. I also linked the channels I mentioned. And so, well, that's it for today. So thank you all for watching.